You are now listening to the Purple Fox Podcast.
There's these people that come into these hackathons that are the youngest version of data hackers, and they
Right.
come in and they do their best to try and break stuff, and then they all talk about how they tried to break it so they can all walk away with a better understanding. And there are Eastern Europeans that came to these things. There's people from Amsterdam, there's people from Japan, and so there's this whole community of people who are looking at this problem and trying to break stuff.
What's going on, everybody? This is Kevin C. Eze once again with your host of the Purple Fox Podcast. And today we are taking a look at cybersecurity and many of the realms that it touches. In the foxhole today, we have Mr. Marc Wendt. Marc Wendt is a wisdom coach, podcast host, musician, and he also appears as a Jedi in the film Star Wars: Attack of the Clones. I'm very jealous of that, by the way. I was looking over your bio. I was like, oh man, that must have been really cool. How was that, by the way?
Oh, it's like a boyhood dream come true.
Right.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah. And, it was a Jedi extra spot, right? Like I don't
Okay.
have a line. And
Right.
That's
You're one of the major battle scenes. Yeah.
Yeah. But getting to be put in a costume, filmed on a green screen, fighting imaginary bugs was a great joy. One of the high points of my life so far, among others.
Right. I can imagine. That would be one of the more fun sets to be on. I would imagine that maybe Game of Thrones or something like that. Yeah.
Well, it was just a big blue screen.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So you're not actually fighting these creatures. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was done after the initial shooting round.
Okay. Cool.
So basically, the producer George Lucas looked at the footage he had, and he says, "I need more Jedi in here."
Nice.
So I responded to an audition. And, I was on the fencing team in high school, and I had some martial arts skills.
Oh, that helps. Yeah.
The physical audition.
Right. And
just to complete the story, it was exhausting because there were 8 points of the compass and 3 lighting setups. So I had to do my kata 24 times.
Wow.
In order for it to
get the shot
for use. So it was way more of a workout than I thought it was.
Right.
I'm glad I trained as hard as I did.
Nice. Well, let's get started. So first of all, welcome to the Foxhole.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We'll just paint a picture for the audience around the topic we're going to touch on. So the growing threat of cyber insecurity is an area of defense that needs serious investment in the coming years. In recent years, countless entities that we consider crucial to U.S. operations and wealth generation have been hacked by bad faith actors looking to cripple the American Leviathan we call a nation. According to a Hill article by Michael Schnell entitled "Federal Agencies, International Partners Issue Warning on Russian Cyber Threats," the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, the FBI, and the NSA signed and issued an advisory along with other international agencies regarding Russian cyber threats targeting critical infrastructure that could affect organizations both within and beyond Ukraine. Schnell mentions within the article that the advisory includes information regarding malicious cyber operations perpetrated by actors associated with the Russian Federal Security Service, FSB, Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, SVR, Russian General Staff Main Intelligence Directorate, GRU, and the Russian Ministry of Defense, Central Scientific Institute of Chemistry and Mechanics. In another ABC News article by Beatrice Peterson entitled "Wall Street Eyes Cybersecurity with Goldman Sachs Announcing $125 Million Investment," Peterson writes, quote, "Growing concerns over cybersecurity vulnerabilities in the United States are prompting record investments from firms to protect critical industries. FBI Director Christopher Wray said last month that intelligence officials were concerned about the possibility of Russian cyber attacks against critical U.S. infrastructure in the wake of Russia's war with Ukraine, end quote. So neither of us are experts by any means around this topic, but what what would you say would be a prime target for Russian cyber infiltration if they were to hit some entity within the U.S.? Because we know that we've been um, sort of assisting Ukraine with cyber capabilities in their handling of the Russian invasion. So what would you think Russia would hit?
Oh, I think the primary target they've already been hitting, and that's the consciousness of the American public.
Right.
I think that the
Yeah.
information war, there's infrastructure, there's data cleanliness,
Hmm.
but ultimately the foundation of our culture rests on our capacity to have reasonable discussions with each other. And so
Hmm.
there's a definite impact that's already been happening with the way that we talk to each other and how we view information. You can really see this in the whole Trump phenomena. And there's a lot of, with that whole story about what was it, Analytica, the company that helped with
Cambridge
Cambridge
Analytica.
Analytica,
Yeah.
and the way that
Yeah.
the there was a lot of reasonable suspicion
Mm.
that the election of Donald Trump was facilitated by Russian bad actors.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, a lot of it was false, but a lot of the evidence around it was still um, it it was clear that they attempted to aid, even if it didn't have a direct correlation. Like we could see the paper trail around them. I mean, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I know Ken Blackman recently posted an MIT study around 19 out of 20. I think it was the Christian
Yep.
sites were infiltrated by Russian actors, and I think it might have been even one of these organizations, probably the FSB, because they're more skilled with the cybersecurity unit. Um, yeah, so they and we can see the bots clearly. We can see the bots. We can see the fake profiles. We know something's off when we see these profiles with. There's no real history around the profile. There's just these like fake pro. Sometimes they're even pictures of people we know. And we're like, yeah, that's not so clever. It's famous actors or models, and they kind of like obscure their photos and then post them with these fake profiles. So yeah, and it had a big impact in 2016, and we saw how that contributed to the kind of division of our nation. Um,
Yeah. So when we talk about the winning hearts and minds as
right.
any conflict objective, that's really where a lot of ground is made in
Hmm.
terms of what we'll call cyber warfare or
Right.
warfare in general.
Right.
So that's one category, and I think then the secondary category is what we call infrastructure related. And we've
Hmm.
seen how that electric company was the fuel distribution company that was shut down
Right.
in last winter.
Right.
That was done ostensibly as a way to generate income from hackers, pirates. But when you see the level of vulnerability that we have to infrastructure elements, command and control elements within our power grid, within our data systems,
Mm.
those kinds of things become targets in a more escalated conflict. Now, the thing about that, I think, is that once we start down that road of tit for tat, a lot of the infrastructure and data hosting services that we rely on for information, we're sharing them. Like, I don't think Russia
Mm.
is invulnerable to unleashing destructive forces. Like, they might actually unleash something in that area that would get back to them. And I think
Right.
it's been posited that the Chernobyl meltdown was the result of a virus that leaked around command and control systems in the Mid East that
Oh,
migrated,
interesting.
right? And because the system, I can't remember the name of the.
So it wasn't even the risk of the nuclear itself. It was the result of a hack that went awry.
Well, My understanding of it, and again, I'm not qualified really, but my speculation is
Right.
that something that the Western powers unleashed in Iran to impede their ability to mm, um, continue to operate a nuclear facility,
Right.
what they use, the methods that they use to monitor and control the function of that nuclear facility were
Mm-hmm.
the same as what was built in Fukushima.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
Fukushima was affected as a result, and it
Right.
was sort of an unintended consequence of this data packet getting out. Because when you corrupt
Mm-hmm.
a system that's connected to the global internet,
Mm-hmm.
that system corruption may or may not be controllable. And it was sort of the law of
Mm-hmm.
unintended consequences as I read it,
Mm.
right?
Is
And
it
so
like
when
sort
you
of like a chain reaction in that way?
right,
Right.
because the system that it's interlocked. So when you break part of it,
Mm-hmm.
you can break all of it
Right.
unintentionally.
Right.
And so I think one of the reasons we haven't seen more overt cyber conflict is because it may be that if you harm us, you harm yourself in a way.
Mm. Double-edged sword.
So targeting hacks and cyber attacks is tricky.
Mm.
One, to cover your tracks and not be known, and number two, what you break might break you,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's why we see it manifest mostly as an information war, the hearts and minds piece, because the physical infrastructure is actually a little bit more difficult, you know to break.
Mm.
There was that thing at the outset of the Ukrainian hostilities where we were concerned that the Russian submarines were going to cut the European American internet connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
There's that
Mm-hmm.
trunk that comes out of Ireland and heads over to the North America, where a
Mm.
lot of different banking information and stuff was trafficked, and it would be very difficult to replace that, right?
Right.
And supposedly the story is that the Irish fishermen scared off the the powerful Kremlin Navy. I love that's what happened, and
Right.
you build it up, but I'm not convinced that that's why they did
That's
it.
exactly why I went down that way. Yeah. I mean, and whatever helps to create the lore around it, because that always helps with morale in those ways.
Right.
Like they're not as big of a boogeyman as people make them out to be, and especially on that note. So we know that Russia isn't the only threat on this front. And the media is highlighting the capabilities of that nation for obvious current events. Um, but nations like China and North Korea come to mind when I think of sovereign entities with the ability to hit us hard. And there's also individual hacking cells with no national affiliation who carry out their own aims. And these can be
Anonymous
right,
is one of
anonymous,
those,
exactly.
and they're
They
not centrally controlled. What is anonymous,
Right, and
right?
I don't even know what their actual intention is. I don't know. I don't know what their philosophy is. Are they just like a for the people entity that just takes down any kind of big anything?
Well, I think they're against globalization as
Oh,
it stands to harm us as a general
oh,
population,
interesting.
i.e., and I don't think there's a central, just like with the in 2008, there was the anti-Wall Street thing. There was no
Oh,
visible head.
Occupy Wall Street.
Occupy
Occupy
Wall
Wall
Street.
Street.
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
think there's a visible command and control structure
Right. Yeah.
in Anonymous. I
It was
think
mostly
anyone can
grassroots that
say
way.
I'm anonymous,
Right, exactly. It could be. It could literally be. I think there's multiple branches. To be honest,
but I
Well, I
think
mean, once you don that Guy Fawkes mask, you can pretty much claim to be connected to it.
But I think when you want to coordinate actual attacks that involve mass effort,
Right.
you have to bring people in around an idea that
Mm-hmm.
has merit, that is functionally valuable to the masses, as it were, or to what we could call the middle class or the data class,
Data class. I
right?
like
Because
that.
let's not forget that there's still this massive digital divide in our
Hmm.
culture
Yeah.
and in the world culture, and we're working to solve that issue. But so I- to me, there's bad actors. It's the
Hmm.
white hat, black hat, neutral hat kind of modality that we've heard about in hacking. But when it becomes national, in the sense of Russian actors, or, well, let's say former Soviet bloc actors, right,
Mm-hmm.
versus the West. It gets dicey because there's so many counter narratives from the intelligence community, right? What's a false flag in the data arena, right? For all we know, the hackers that hacked into that fuel depot that last year, they could have been, international spy agencies that needed to fund a black operation, and they just made it look like that they were Eastern Bloc because, you know, the last domino to fall is going to be Russia in the
Right.
the Western conquest of the former Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
And so on one level, Ukraine that was the line in the sand that Russia said, like, we're not going to let Ukraine be NATO,
Yeah.
right? And so that's part of this narrative.
It's the last country on their border that actually isn't either NATO itself or promised to NATO. You know, so that I mean, I can see why they'd be spooked. Um,
So there's so many layers to it. From where you and I
exactly.
sit, we can't be sure
Right.
whether a hack
There's
is a hack from who they say it is or who they don't say it is.
right, and the news is so unreliable. You know, it could be any entity. It could be one of those right wing militant entities within Ukraine. It could be Russia itself. It could be an independent affiliation. This isn't something that we just have to worry about from international powers. So last year, Robinhood, the infamous investment platform at the center of the GameStop Wall Street Bets controversy, was cyber attacked by a third party hacking group. The hackers gained access to 5 million Robinhood customer emails addresses, plus the full names of 2 million others, and more personal information such as names, birth dates, and zip codes of 310 people. So, my question to you is, how can our nation, self proclaimed to be the greatest on earth, be so wide open to such cyber invasion?
Well, our nation isn't able to cover all of the business vectors that
Right.
impact us.
Hmm.
It's just not possible. I mean,
Hmm.
we're essentially no longer governed by uh, the Congress and the president. And to some degree,
It
we're
seems that way.
corralled by the military industrial prison complex. But ultimately, it's the corporate entities that run the boat.
Hmm.
And that's why corporate data security is such an important piece, right? Like that's why
Hmm.
all those agencies are saying, look, we need to up our game here. And I think if you look at the hiring patterns of multinational corporations that have, a lot of Western orientation, you'll
Hmm.
see that they're starting data security departments. Like data security is a track now in college and MIT and all these places because
Right.
the money needs it to be protected,
Hmm.
right? And the government doesn't have the law enforcement branches of the government, they don't have the means or the resources to defend us at that level,
Hmm.
and we live in the digital hands of Amazon Web Services
Right.
and Facebook
Google.
and Google
Yeah.
and the networks that supply our internet for us.
Yeah.
So we're literally on our own. On some levels, it's like the wild, wild west in terms of how we handle our own personal data security.
Hmm.
So, buyer beware. Like everyone, go out there and do that. What they say, like every 90 days, change your password. Or, recently I've looked into getting one of those global password managers.
What is that?
It's a thing where I install it on my browser and it handles all my passwords and it uses by
Oh,
default.
okay. Okay. I've seen
Last
commercials for that.
Password is the one I signed up for, and I haven't implemented it yet. But
Are those
my
things trustable though? Are they
well, I
like
think
what?
they are. Like a friend of mine who's in this space, who is literally a data security consultant.
Okay.
I mean, he's not high level,
All
but
right.
he's someone I trust and who I've known all my life. And he says
Mm-hmm.
those things are way better because the passwords they supply are, very, very highly encrypted and uncrackable, or at
Oh, they
least,
generate them for you.
yeah. So, but then
Oh,
now
wow.
I have this third party
Uh-huh.
that manages my passwords for me. And I'm
Uh-huh.
like debating this. Like
Yeah,
on one
yeah,
level,
yeah.
okay, like I'm gonna be
The red
safer.
flags. Yeah.
But on another level, I'm no longer gonna have control
All
of what
right.
the password is. It's
Mm-hmm.
like I'm gonna assent to it, meaning they're gonna say, "How about this one?" I'm gonna say yes, and then they're gonna manage it for me, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna pay them every month.
Right.
to manage it for me. And that could be like, ultimately that should be on my banking software. It should be on all my software. But then what happens if I can't pay them 1 month?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Where does that
What
break
is that?
down?
Yeah. What is it? And do they just, because I'd assume even if you stop paying them, your records are still going to be there, right?
Right.
Like
And in
what?
theory, they are obligated by law to support me in the contract, but
Right.
now it's extrajudicial. It's no longer between me and the party I'm having a password with. It's them as my intermediary. And what does the law say about their obligation to me? And what if they get hacked?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That was a
Right?
big question on my mind right now. Yeah.
Right?
So
There's
I
so
mean,
many
their
layers to this
firewall
onion.
would have to be phenomenal.
Well, their firewall, their data security,
Yeah.
I don't think there is such a thing anymore.
Wow.
Like,
That's.
that's the thing. If they want in,
Hmm.
depending who they are,
Hmm.
if they bring enough cryptography cracking power to the problem, they're going to find you. I mean, we've seen the movies where the NSA is tracking the individual and they find a way to hack in,
Right.
right? And usually it's depicted as some master hacker who's keying it in. The reality
Right.
is it's AI,
Yeah.
because you can't compute that many possibilities but as a person with their fingers on a keyboard. It's just not, that's not how it works, I don't think.
Yeah, I really think AI in this space specifically, I think AI, whether it's on the protection side or the infiltration side, AI is going to have a huge hand to play in the future with this.
It's such an incredible thing. I used to work at the Internet Archive, and
Hmm.
one of the things that the Internet Archive used to do is hold hackathons to try
Uh-huh.
and find guys that could crack certain problems,
Right.
not to break into institutions,
Uh-huh.
but to hack into the way data structures worked so that they could protect themselves. I don't know if you
Mm.
know what archive.org is. Do you know what it is? Have you ever heard of the Wayback Machine?
Mm. The Wayback Machine. I think I've heard that name before, but I
So
don't know what it is.
archive.org, you can go and put any URL into their search function for the Wayback Machine. It'll give you the entire archive of their website for dawning of time for the web. It goes back to 1997. That's the beginning of most websites.
Hmm.
And so, because they have this storage of every website that they've ever scanned,
Mm.
all the way back to before the turn of the century, it's important to the Internet Archive to know whether their systems are safe or not. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's these people that come into these hackathons
Hmm.
that are the youngest version of data hackers, and they
Right.
come in and they do their best to try and break stuff,
Hmm.
and then they all talk about how they tried to break it so they can all walk away with a better understanding. And there are Eastern Europeans that came to these things, there's people from Amsterdam, there's people from Japan,
Hmm.
and so there's this whole like community of people who are looking at this problem and trying to break stuff.
Hmm.
And we see guys that break stuff at the highest corporate levels get offered jobs in their data security offices.
Hmm.
And one of the weird things, the weird ways to get hired at the top level of this, is to do stuff that's considered breaking and entering in order to show them, like, hey, I figured out where
This
your
is
weakness
my
is.
level of talent, my skill,
Right. Um,
proficiency. Wow.
so proving your worth involves actually breaking in somewhere
Yeah.
in this
That's
space.
actually a really interesting interview tactic. That's
Right.
like it's like I can see them lining up three people and then they're like, crack this.
And we don't know
And
what
they
we don't
just
know about the CIA and the
uh-huh.
military industrial complexes computers that have been hacked that way,
Right.
and about who they owe favors to keep them protected.
Mm.
Like, that's
Hmm.
where it gets really dicey. Like, who's
Hmm.
broken into the Pentagon systems that we don't know about? Because if they
Right.
ever told us, then the Russians heard about it. It would, right? Like, there's so many layers of this that we don't know.
Yeah.
We have no insight into, and that they can't tell us. Right.
Hmm.
And maybe, this is what's so amazing about the globalization of the economy. I think we're actually so interlocked now that I don't think it's really possible for us to actually allow cyber warfare to break out between these.
Yeah. It's kind of like that mutually assured destruction that's tacked on to nuclear weapons. It's the same level of detriment too. It's we're thinking about this meta space, and then we have our own earthly plane. In one respect, nuclear weapons are kind of like the destruction of that earthly plane. And then the meta or cyber aspect is cyber warfare. You know, like you said, it could potentially tank all systems when you're trying to, you know, single out a specific entity to target. You know, they don't know the ramifications. So
Well,
that,
someone does. I think
well,
you,
yeah, someone does.
but you and I don't
I
necessarily
have
know.
no idea. Right.
But it's theoretically
Scary thought.
plausible in my viewpoint that if you unleash a thing that's going to start eating Amazon web servers
Right.
without anyone being able to stop it, that at some point you might not be able to stop it when you
Right.
want it to stop, right?
So you mentioned earlier that we're almost kind of at the mercy of these big tech firms, and Congress has kind of like lost its grip. And that's kind of why I feel as if investment is so low in this department. It's because I feel like lawmakers don't fully understand the digital and tech landscape as well as they should. I remember it was both equally sad and hilarious when they were interviewing Mark Zuckerberg on the Facebook platform, and they couldn't rack their minds around how he was making money. And he was like, him and his team were so dumbfounded at the questions, and they were like, "Senator, I run ads, you know, like how did you not know that?" And there's so I feel like our legislators are so out of touch. So do you feel as if U.S. lawmakers are out of touch with the growing field of cyber technology and what they need to understand to make policy around it?
I'm going to go way like a whole nother layer beyond that and say
Mm.
yes, and
Hmm.
they're totally out of touch with what it takes to govern.
True.
Our system is broken.
Yeah.
It's broken because of big money is necessary in order to get elected. The
Hmm.
whole idea of favoritism and, you know, the insider game. It's no longer responsive to the people.
Mm-hmm.
It's responsive to the Western oligarchy, the corporate
Donors.
elite,
Yeah.
donors. You know, there's even a nefarious element of what we'll call control files, where
Mm.
intelligence agencies hold the goods over politicians, and as a result, or corporate entities hold the goods over politicians as a result. And you can see this with Joe Manchin. What's been happening with Joe
Mm.
Manchin?
Hmm.
There, he cannot be the deciding factor in anything that stops global warming because he's beholden to certain entities, and it's just obvious on the face
Mm-hmm.
of it, and we don't even have to like, right?
Probably
And
too deep into
right,
it. Yeah. Yeah.
right,
But I mean, there are several people who have pried deep into it, and it's clearly on the surface. You know, it's if you look into this guy's life, I believe his daughter is on the board of this pharmaceutical company that is practicing wildly corrupt policy. I forget the name of the company, but it's just there. No one cares. Everyone can see what she's doing with this
well,
company,
this is true
raking in the
across so many
profits. Yeah,
arenas of our government, right?
yeah.
Right. And personally, I think one of the things that was so amazing to me was to realize that so many of former President Trump's real estate deals are
Mm.
tied into Russian held investment vehicles
Hmm.
and banks that had ties to Russia, that it makes perfect sense to me why, you know, he had the relationship he did with Putin,
Hmm.
right? I mean, that guy, he argued that Putin was right against so even our own people,
Right.
right? So what's at the root of this is that we've lost control of the concept of we the people
Hmm.
governing the Congress and the presidency and, you know, the judicial branch by proxy. We have this shell of our former capacity, and one could argue that, you know, it was always about money control over the colonies that
Hmm.
the system was born in, which is why, you know, there were so many ways that slavery was supported by the policies of the US government. Even after, you know, Reconstruction and the Civil War, it was still embedded in our economics.
Yeah, it was purely a financial decision, which is the most interesting. And it's crazy that, like, when I think about that, it's like if you're thinking just purely economic uh, feasibility, sustainability, it makes sense that they wouldn't release them. You know, they were. It wasn't purely malicious. I'm sure there are some segments of the population who had that superiority complex around it. But yeah, it's purely, especially in the South, because at the time, if they were to if when the abolitionist movement first started, if they were to release them at that time, it would have tanked the South financially. So they couldn't find a way around it, and they had to. It took the bent of war to actually get them to be like, okay, you know what? We've half of our landscape is already ruined anyways. We might as well just like do this thing. So yeah,
So what
it's
this
crazy to
points
think about.
out is the fundamental flaw in the promise and hope of the greatest democracy in history,
Right.
which I'm all bought in. Like I love the concept of self-rule,
Hmm.
this idea of freedom of religion, freedom of speech, jurisprudence conducted by a jury of my peers.
Hmm.
Like, I think there's this deep dream that lives in the hearts of most people around the globe that the American experience could work.
Right.
But
I
that
think
what
it's
we find
possible.
out and what people don't want to pay attention to is that it's rotten, that
Yeah.
it's actually broken at
Yeah.
such a fundamental level. Because if we knew that, if people admitted that to each other, we'd really recognize the soup we're in. You know, I've been writing movies and things, and one of the things that's at a premise of part of my creative world is this idea of a new Continental Congress,
Hmm.
where we take and we make it possible for the idea of the ratio of representation to
Hmm.
more accurately reflect the people of the country, such that we eliminate the barriers to representative government. So we could have 100,000 senators and say 564,000 representatives.
Hmm.
And the way that could do that would be to leverage audiovisual technology to connect us to the decision making process. So imagine that the Continental Congress forms and people vote on a new constitution, and at the inherent in that is that we eliminate the electoral college.
Hmm.
Now we've got 100,000 senators, and you literally can go and talk to your senator in your neighborhood and
Right,
your
because they
representative,
probably live in your neighborhood.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And this tool that I'm holding up an iPhone right now,
Hmm.
could be the gateway to how we manage the data and do that. And then we could use technology for how those people, how would you get 100,000 senators to have a debate and to propose a bill? So we'd have to analyze these processes. And I've actually had conversations with people, and some people are like, it'll never work. That's
Yeah.
too much. But where I'm
Too
at is I'm kind of like,
extensive.
we need something to hope for.
Yeah, we do.
We need to present a new possibility and then debug it, because otherwise we're just going down.
Mm.
There's no other, I mean, everybody can see the writing on the wall. You just look at the movies. Armageddon is coming. Like
Right.
everybody's psychology is all wrapped around on the fall of Western civilization.
Well, so do you think in the future we'll have a populace that can support that ideal? Aldrich of CPO magazine makes the argument that cybersecurity resilience is low because we don't have enough skilled personnel to match the demand in security needs. And this is his article entitled "Why We Need a Holistic Approach to Cyber Resilience." And in the article, he lays out how um, we only talk about the tech side of it, but we don't talk about the other two components, which are people and I believe policy. I believe I agree with what he's saying because I see smaller communities pushing the youth towards STEM education and things of that nature. But do you see our nation becoming a place that fosters a love of STEM and embraces a larger culture of like technological focus in the future? Is that like where
I
you
think
think
it's
we're heading?
possible. I think
Uh-huh.
it's essential for our survival.
Right. I think so too. Hmm.
And that more and more people are, especially in generations that are younger than yours and mine,
Hmm.
are getting clear that that is necessary.
Yeah.
But the speed of innovation that it's going to require is not built into our legislative system.
Hmm.
So how we get there from where we're at is tricky because so
Yeah.
many of our institutions are wrapped up in this old paradigm. For instance, the University of California
Hmm.
was supposed to be free
Mm.
to Californians. It was chartered that the taxes that paid for it would mean everyone. But since the last 45, 50 years, the industrial aspect of education has become centered around corporate control of research projects and
Right.
the banking interest making money off of student loans. And
The death of everything.
right, so there's this aspect of our society that has to be completely transformed, and there
Right.
was an attempt to do that in the 60s that marginally impacted us in a greater way, but there was this kind of re-establishment of establishment control over these things. And so how
Mm.
do we break it down? Well, it either going to break down along the lines of decay and
Mm.
then leave a kind of feudalism sitting on top of it,
Interesting. Okay.
or we're going to have to come up with a concept that we can give to people that are young
Mm.
of how to reform it. And that's the new spirit of 7076. It's this idea of breaking down nationalism and establishing a globalism that exists in the framework of how about a new world order that's based on this idea of self-rule, of democracy.
I think that's the idea behind Web3, actually. I think
Well, that's
that's,
right.
yeah,
Decentralized web
right.
could facilitate that, right?
Yeah.
And decentralized web means that we can't have Comcast controlling the network,
Hmm.
right? And so again, I go back to this Elon Musk thing, like, okay, here we go. Starlink, it's decentralized internet access.
Right.
Starlink owns it, sure. And for now, we're going to need a benevolent, centralized economic structure to sort of build in the infrastructure that we would need to do it. But
Mm.
first, we have to give people the idea that it's possible.
Right.
We have to say to our youth, you know what? We could have a Congress that's 100,000 people. We could have a United States of the Earth instead of a United States, and
Mm.
that we could build a decision matrix that leverages technology so that individuals could actually influence the process in a
Mm.
local way, and then that could cross populate in a global way. But we need to design that, and computers and network infrastructure are the first representation of that being a real possibility.
Yeah.
Before that, there was just no way to manage all the logistics of all that decision making. But right now, cancel culture is an example of how we vote.
Yeah.
Like literally, we're making those decisions, but we're not making them on anything that's pertinent to our
Yeah.
survival.
It's just pure numbers, pure
It's the zeitgeist
populist
of our
democracy.
social,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. So if we could
We
somehow
think this should be
empower
gone.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
to actually reflect our governance structures,
Hmm.
and then now instead of worrying about global warming, we've got people working on it because we all voted together to do that.
Mm.
It's sort of a like socialism, communism doesn't work,
No.
and capitalism that's run rampant, it's become a cancer, doesn't work.
Yeah,
So
it's
there's a
a huge
new
problem.
hybrid
Yeah.
that has to emerge.
It has, and that's I don't understand why more people don't gravitate towards the nexus. It's like the polarization is easy, but when you think clearly about the issues that we're facing, you understand that there has to be some kind of hybrid approach. I mean, it's like with energy, even not even just talking about cyber. It's like everyone lumps themselves into the camp of fossil fuels or clean energy, or some people even just say it's got to be nuclear, But really, to survive this, what we're going to have to do is like kind of amalgamate all three, like make all three some kind of central component in the way that we run our energy policy. Otherwise, one or all is going to be depleted at some point. Yeah.
Yep. The law of diminishing returns is
Yeah.
definitely present here. What you can look at is Tesla almost didn't happen.
Right.
It almost went bankrupt. And there was
Mhm.
a reason for that. There were people literally shorting the stock and attacking Elon because the big three automakers have had a stranglehold on transportation
Mm.
for generations, and they
Yeah.
weren't going to let it come up. And you just go back to the 20s, and there was the water car in 1920s.
Mm.
The Thomas Edison took the patents from Tesla, the original Nikolai Tesla, because he was going to have free power be the thing.
Yeah.
And
Free
so there's
energy.
this, the clutches of corporate dominance, the old bastions who think that the only way is centrally controlled economic structures, that some profit center has to be managed and controlled for the benefit of the shareholders.
Hmm.
That old way is dying, and we can either get behind it and reimagine it and recreate it from a really iterative place with all of the innovation and intellectual capacity that we have as a global society,
Yeah.
or we can continue to be held back and have a war about it, which will ultimately continue to solidify and calcify the central control of the power of the elite around it. And that's literally what we're facing right now as a society, as a global society. And I'm an optimist, so I believe that innovation and technology and that yearning to be free, that the desire of young people and people everywhere to be able to have the autonomy to choose for themselves. I believe in that. I think ultimately, I was raised a hippie, so I've seen people share what they had. So
Yeah.
I know that we don't, when you kill free enterprise and the individualized nature of innovation,
Hmm.
and communism, that don't work, right? That's not going to work. Socialism won't work because you're imposing it externally. So some kind of weird hybrid that says, yes, you can become whatever you want in the global economy,
Hmm.
and we're going to provide free education, and we're going to provide innovative solutions to the economic and then the environmental problems that we face. There's a way, and I think it's possible, but we have to get everyone bought in on that possibility instead of bought in on the it'll never work
Right.
mentality. And so again, it comes back to changing hearts and minds. If you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
Yeah. I'm still bitter about that, by the way. I wasn't even alive, and I blame J.P. Morgan for that. He bought out Westinghouse. That they would have fundamentally changed society, him and Tesla. But
Well, and people know that now.
yeah,
That story is now getting told.
exactly.
Critical race theory is teaching people about the real history of the United States.
Right.
The cat's out of the bag. That's what happened with the information revolution, and that you can't put that cat back in the bag. But there's a lot of regressive forces that are trying to maintain their control over it, and we see that in the bills that are trying to stop things
Hmm.
in the Russian, not the Russian, but the Republican states in the United States, where they're trying to change education and they're trying to
Hmm.
do all these things. But there's no way. The people are yearning to be free, and
Right.
those who facilitate that and who have the courage will thrive. And we just have to get together and figure it out.
Hmm. So history tells me that we typically flounder around a certain issue until we hit some critical point. COVID-19 comes to mind. However, we always seem to, luckily, eke out some kind of small victory in terms of innovation or breakthroughs. But do you think there will ever come a time where this country completely fails to meet the moment?
Yeah, I think it happens every day.
Huh?
We're failing
Interesting.
all of the children that can't read in places like Chicago and Minneapolis, and that we're failing by having the conflict that's drip escalating in the Ukraine and Russia continue to escalate along the
Hmm.
lines of the old battle lines. So yeah, and within that framework, we always innovate. We always find a way to come back together and
Hmm.
to create. Now, even in the scenario that most people will postulate, well, what if there's a nuclear war? Even then, whoever's left, there'll be some form of economic and agrarian cooperation amongst that small population.
Hmm.
So, in my philosophy, in my mindset, the beliefs that I'm choosing to cultivate, both things exist simultaneously,
Hmm.
the decay and the growth. And so what
Right.
we want to do is, like Tesla's done, like Elon Musk has done, we want to nurture with everything we've got this innovative spirit
Hmm.
and bring that through the economic forces of our culture. And then that will just obliterate the competition. And that's the system we're in. So that's what we have to use to change it.
Hmm.
And you look, like the Ford F-150 is going to be all electric starting
Right.
2 years from now,
It looks
right?
good. Yeah.
And we could, California tried to legislate that at the turn of the century. It was going to be in 2000, 1/3 of all cars in California were supposed to be
Mm,
electric. And the legislature kept being bought off by the
right.
lobby and putting
People
that,
thought they were nuts too when they're
right?
you're going to overhaul all of your inventory and make it all EV, and then it went all the way down to, I believe their shares price was like $20. I remember at its lowest point,
But
and now it's back up,
consumers
you know.
are demanding it.
Yeah,
That's how we have organic food,
yeah.
is because consumers are demanding it.
Hmm.
And that's how we have gluten-free everything now. There's so many gluten-free options because people are demanding it. And so when we recognize that our power of choice as individuals really is the thing, when we, the people, get together and decide to form a more perfect union based on the new awareness of what it is to live on this planet in harmony and
Hmm.
togetherness and freedom and individualism, we can do it. Nothing can stop us, not the economics, not the government, none of it. But there's a whole system that's designed to like undereducate us and
Hmm.
have us frame our economic opportunities through the lens of where are we going to work 9 to 5.
Right.
But that broke. That got broken by COVID
Mm.
and many other things like the whole digital revolution of the web itself, and now Bitcoin and NFTs, like, and they're all problematic. None of it is the utopian solution. It's all problematic, but it's that willingness to debate and engage and then reiterate and refine our thinking around every subject that saves us in the end.
Mm.
And it's funny because when you look at these disaster movies like Armageddon from the last century, where we got to send a spaceship to blow up the asteroid before it kills the Earth.
Mm.
The central thing is that everybody comes together to try to figure it out. And
Mm.
that principle, that's biological. That's written into our internal software, our DNA, I think. That when the shit hits the fan, we're going to either come together to defend against the usurpers, or we're going to come together to triumph over and conquest the next thing. And so,
Mm.
how we train ourselves spiritually, values, and then from a standpoint of intellectual capacity represents the possibility for humanity. And every day I woke up, at one point I decided I was going to make a stand for believing in human potential, not
Mm.
being, pessimistic about human potential.
Man, I'm so
And
right there with you.
that's how we have a choice. Like,
We
and
do.
so how can I show up for people?
Yeah.
And so as a coach, I show up for people. I say, like, well, what can we do differently? How can
Mm.
we, right? And then as a
Mhm.
writer, I imagine a whole different world, and I'm going to try to get that movie made, right?
Right.
But I'm not sitting on the economic top. I mean, I'm white privileged, middle class Marinite. I have a lot going for me right now,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
But I'm still like, I haven't gotten those movies made. I haven't even finished this second one that's about this
Mhm.
principle of democracy and all that. But when I see your posts on social media and I see Ken and I see these other, you know, parts of our social structure, I know no one wants to settle.
No, it's just not in the cards. Like it's an option, but it's not the attractive option for sure.
Yeah,
It's
and
there's something else to move forward
every
towards.
time I meet a woman who feels like frustrated and angry, I ask her if she'll run for office. And most of them have a reason why it will never work. And I say to them, well, consider it. Like,
Yeah.
that's what it is we all have to step up and do what we can.
Yeah. So to kind of close this out, so there are things that we see our society transforming little by little in terms of technology. We see automation, we see self-driving cars, factory assemblage tech, AI synced farming, and among so much others. And we know that we'll need the skilled professionals and the safeguards and systems to protect them. So given all that we've discussed, I know you kind of laid out a picture for kind of what you want to see, but in specifics, like how do you envision cybersecurity in the next 10 years? And
About
not just cybersecurity though, but all that it encompasses, seeing as how our landscape is becoming, I mean, fundamentally, it's being swallowed by the tech sector in a way. That's our future. So how do you see that in 10 years?
It's the gateway to education,
Mm.
right? No longer having to go to university. directly to be in university. The problem with that is human animals need each other from just a visceral standpoint.
The social aspect.
So we have to bridge that somehow.
Right.
And so there's white hats and black hats and people who are passive. And I think people who represent the spirit of Elon Musk, who are going to provide new networks and new possibilities for solar and new power structures that have an economic potency to them. And then we have people that are spiritual leaders in the sense that they're, people that are the new earth, or this emergent, like cross-cultural desire to have people become awakened into a new possibility is the thread of education. And so we have to nurture education and the idea that no matter where you are on the planet, no matter what the economic limitations, that your personal intellectual brilliance and your personal capacity to love life can be leveraged to help you educate yourself to become more useful in this transition. So cybersecurity, food security, environmental security, they all come together in this one new paradigm of enabling the true possibility for humanity to evolve, right? And I think that's the fundamental piece. Without that freedom of discussion, freedom of debate, we have no democracy.
Right.
I mean, that's my philosophy. That's where I will lay down my life for. And I'm grateful for this conversation, because a lot of this stuff I don't get to talk about.
Right. That's what this is, man. That's why the Foxhole was created. And
I want to acknowledge you, Kevin, for raising in all of your social media posts, you raise a conscious willingness to debate, and you poke at people's sort of picadillos around their intellectual capacities. You want to disturb people in their comfort zone of their thinking. And I think that's an essential piece of what we're doing.
Thank you for noticing that, man. That's for me, that's everything, because once you get stuck in a certain frame of mind and you calcify around that, it's so hard to get out of it, and you leave yourself open to so many blind spots and opportunities. There's so much to miss when that's your frame of mind. So thank you for pointing that out, man, and thank you for coming in and showering the Foxhole with your energy. You are honestly like you're like the purple fox spirit. You're like the person that really comes into this space and shines. So thank you for sharing with our audience your wealth of knowledge, and this has been awesome. So thank you.
Thanks all to my ancestors and to all the people who've taken the personal labor to educate me and help me break out of my own blind spots.
Right.
I believe in the possibilities.
Yeah. So this has been another episode of the Purple Fox podcast. We want to thank our guest, Marc Wendt, and this is your host, Kevin C. Eze, signing out.